What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest legends sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, only to discover the host has prepared an ambush that will shock the entertainment world? Tonight we're diving into the explosive confrontation that ended with security escorting a music icon off the set, leaving audiences stunned and the host scrambling to explain what just happened. The Tonight Show with Jimmy Kimmel was supposed to be another routine promotional stop for Cher, who was making the rounds to discuss her upcoming memoir and reflect on her decades-spanning career. What started as typical celebrity banter quickly devolved into something far more sinister when Kimmel decided to veer completely off script. The audience, expecting their usual dose of light-hearted entertainment, instead witnessed one of the most uncomfortable exchanges in late-night television history. "So, Cher, let's talk about your book," Kimmel began with his trademark grin, holding up a copy of her memoir. "I have to say I was fascinated by some of the stories you chose to leave out. You know, the ones that didn't make it into these pages." Cher shifted slightly in her chair, her famous composure intact but a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Well, Jimmy, a memoir is about sharing the stories that matter most to you. There are always things you keep private." "Right, right," Kimmel nodded, his smile never wavering but something calculating behind his eyes. "But I'm curious about your relationships. You've been married twice, had some high-profile romances. Tell me, what was it like dating men who were, shall we say, significantly younger than you?" The audience laughed uncomfortably, sensing the shift in tone. Cher's expression hardened slightly. "I've always been attracted to people who inspire me, regardless of age. Love doesn't follow a calendar, Jimmy." "Sure, sure," Kimmel continued, leaning forward with mock interest. "But don't you think there's something a little predatory about a woman in her 70s going after men in their 30s? I mean, if the roles were reversed, people would have a lot to say about it." The studio fell silent. Even the band members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. Cher sat back in her chair, her legendary poise momentarily shaken by the unexpected attack. "Predatory?" she repeated, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Jimmy, I think you might want to reconsider your choice of words here." "I'm just saying what people are thinking," Kimmel shrugged, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the bomb he'd just dropped. "You've got to admit, the optics aren't great. Rich, powerful, older woman, young, struggling actors and musicians. There's definitely a power dynamic at play." Cher's eyes flashed, and anyone who knew her could see the storm brewing. "You know what, Jimmy? I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've faced criticism, judgment, and outright attacks from people who couldn't carry my microphone. But I never expected to sit on your couch and be accused of being a predator." The audience was dead silent now, the usual energy of a late-night show completely drained from the room. Kimmel, however, seemed energized by the confrontation, as if this was exactly what he'd been hoping for. "I'm not accusing you of anything," he said with false innocence. "I'm just asking questions that I think the public deserves answers to. You put yourself out there, you write a book, you go on talk shows. Surely you expected some tough questions." "Tough questions?" Cher's voice rose slightly, her legendary restraint beginning to crack. "There's a difference between tough questions and character assassination, Jimmy. What you're doing right now crosses a line that I never thought I'd see crossed on network television." Kimmel's producer was frantically signaling from the wings, clearly trying to get the host to change direction, but Kimmel seemed oblivious or deliberately ignoring the warnings. He was like a shark who had tasted blood in the water. "Look, Cher, I respect your career, I really do," Kimmel said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "But you have to understand that your personal choices reflect on your public image. When you date men who are decades younger, when you surround yourself with people who depend on you professionally and financially, it raises questions about consent and power dynamics." The word consent hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Cher stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the stunned studio. "Jimmy, I'm going to give you one chance to walk that back," she said, her voice low and controlled but vibrating with barely contained fury. "Because what you just implied about me, about my relationships, about my character, is not just wrong, it's defamatory." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, a smug expression playing across his face. "I'm not implying anything, Cher. I'm stating facts. You have a pattern of relationships with significantly younger men. That's not opinion, that's documented history. I'm just asking you to address the elephant in the room." The camera operators didn't know where to focus. Some kept their lenses trained on Cher, capturing every nuance of her growing anger. Others focused on Kimmel, documenting what would surely become one of the most controversial moments in late-night television history. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing entertainment or a genuine personal attack being broadcast live to millions of viewers. "You want to talk about elephants in the room?" Cher's voice was rising now, her legendary composure finally beginning to crack under the weight of Kimmel's relentless assault. "Let's talk about the elephant of a talk show host who thinks he can ambush his guests with personal attacks disguised as journalism. Let's talk about the elephant of a man who gets his kicks from trying to humiliate women who've achieved more in their careers than he could ever dream of." Kimmel's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, but there was something harder in his eyes now. "Now who's making personal attacks, Cher? I'm just doing my job, asking the questions that people want answered." "Your job?" Cher laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your job is to entertain people, Jimmy. Your job is to make them laugh, to help them forget their troubles for an hour. Your job is not to destroy someone's reputation on national television for your own twisted entertainment." The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Kimmel, apparently mistaking Cher's controlled anger for weakness, decided to double down on his attack strategy. "You know what, Cher? Since we're being honest here, let's talk about your son, Chaz," Kimmel said, his voice taking on an even more sinister tone. "You wrote about your journey accepting his transition, but what you didn't write about was how long it took you to use his correct pronouns. Some people might say that's not very progressive for someone who claims to be an ally." The gasp from the audience was audible. Even the camera crew seemed to recoil at the low blow Kimmel had just delivered. Cher's face went from angry to absolutely livid in the span of a heartbeat. "Do not," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any scream. "Do not bring my son into this. Do not pretend to understand our family's journey or the love we have for each other." "But it's relevant, isn't it?" Kimmel pressed on, seeming to feed off the discomfort he was creating. "You present yourself as this accepting, loving mother, but the reality is you struggled with your son's identity for years. Doesn't that make you a bit of a hypocrite when you talk about acceptance and love?" Cher took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, her famous presence now radiating pure fury. "Jimmy, you have crossed every line of decency, professionalism, and basic human respect. You want to attack me? Fine. But the moment you bring my child into your sick little game, you've gone too far." "I'm not attacking anyone," Kimmel replied with false calm, though his hands were now fidgeting with his index cards. "I'm asking legitimate questions about public statements you've made. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be writing memoirs and going on talk shows." The show's band leader was frantically trying to get someone's attention, clearly wanting to intervene, but the producers seemed frozen, unsure how to handle the situation that was spiraling completely out of control. "Legitimate questions?" Cher's voice was gaining volume now, her legendary restraint completely abandoned. "You think it's legitimate to ambush a guest with accusations of predatory behavior? You think it's legitimate to attack someone's relationship with their child on national television? What kind of person are you, Jimmy?" Kimmel's mask was starting to slip. The jovial late-night host persona was cracking, revealing something much uglier underneath. I'm the kind of person who isn't intimidated by celebrity status. I'm the kind of person who asks the hard questions that other hosts are too scared to ask. Maybe that makes you uncomfortable, but that's not my problem. Hard questions? Sherry laughed bitterly. Jimmy, hard questions would be asking me about the challenges of staying relevant in the music industry for 5 decades. Hard questions would be asking me about the business decisions I've made or the artistic choices that have defined my career. What you're doing isn't journalism, it's character assassination. Maybe your character needs assassinating, Kimmel shot back, and immediately the entire studio went dead silent. Even he seemed to realize he'd gone too far with that statement. Cher stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling as she processed what he'd just said. When she spoke again, her voice was eerily calm. Jimmy, in my 50-plus years in this business, I have been criticized, mocked, dismissed, and underestimated more times than I can count. I've been called every name in the book by people who thought they could diminish me. But I have never, not once, had someone look me in the eye on their own show and tell me that my character needs assassinating. Look, I didn't mean it like that, Kimmel tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The damage was done, and everyone in that studio knew it. No, Jimmy, you meant it exactly like that, Cher replied, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. You invited me here under false pretenses. You made me believe I was coming on your show to talk about my book, my career, my life. Instead, you set up an ambush designed to humiliate me in front of millions of people. Kimmel was starting to sweat now, finally seeming to realize that his plan had backfired spectacularly. Cher, look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we take a commercial break and start over? Start over? Cher's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio wince. You think we can just take a commercial break and pretend you didn't just spend the last 10 minutes trying to destroy my reputation? You think we can start over after you attacked my relationships, my parenting, and my character? The show's producer was now frantically signaling from the wings, making slashing motions across his throat. But Kimmel seemed unable to stop the disaster he'd created. I was just trying to have an honest conversation, Kimmel said weakly, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Sometimes honest conversations are uncomfortable. Honest? Cher's laugh was sharp and cutting. Jimmy, there was nothing honest about this ambush. This was calculated, premeditated character assassination disguised as an interview. You sat in your production meetings. You planned these attacks. You prepared these accusations. And then you invited me here under false pretenses to spring them on me. The audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the train wreck unfolding before them. Some were recording on their phones, capturing what would undoubtedly become one of the most viral moments in television history. You want to know what's really predatory, Jimmy? Cher continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. It's using your platform, your power, your position to attack someone who came here in good faith. It's inviting someone onto your show and then trying to destroy them for your own entertainment and ratings. Kimmel was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and looking anywhere but directly at Cher. I think maybe we should wrap this up, he said quietly. Oh no, Jimmy, Cher said, moving even closer to his desk. You started this conversation, and now you're going to finish it. You wanted to talk about power dynamics? Let's talk about the power dynamic of a host who uses his show to ambush guests who can't fight back on equal terms. Kimmel's face had gone from smugly confident to genuinely panicked, as he realized he had awakened something he couldn't control. Cher was no longer the polite guest sitting in his chair. She was a force of nature unleashed, and she wasn't finished with him yet. You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? Cher said, her voice carrying across the silent studio like a sword cutting through the air. I actually used to respect you. I thought you were one of the good ones in this business. I thought you understood what it meant to treat people with dignity. Cher, please, let's just calm down, Kimmel pleaded. but his words only seemed to fuel her fire. "Calm down," she repeated incredulously. "You spend 15 minutes trying to paint me as a predator and a hypocrite on national television, and now you want me to calm down? Jimmy, you have no idea what you've unleashed here." The show's security team was now visible at the edges of the stage, clearly on standby, but unsure of their role in this unprecedented situation. The band members had stopped pretending to play and were openly staring at the confrontation unfolding before them. "Look, maybe I came on a little strong," Kimmel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you have to understand, in this business, sometimes you have to push boundaries to get real answers." "Push boundaries?" Cher's voice exploded across the studio. "Jimmy, you didn't push boundaries, you obliterated them. You took a wrecking ball to every standard of professional conduct and human decency. And for what? For ratings? For clicks? To make yourself feel important?" Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Cher cut him off with a gesture that somehow commanded absolute silence from everyone in the building. "No, Jimmy, you've had your turn to talk." "Now it's my turn," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than her earlier shouting. "You want to know about power dynamics? Let's talk about a man who uses his television show to systematically tear down women who have achieved more than he ever will." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kimmel's face went pale as he realized where this was heading. "You've done this before, haven't you, Jimmy?" Cher continued, her voice gaining momentum. "This isn't the first time you've invited a female guest on your show just to ambush her with personal attacks. This is your pattern, your method, your sick little power trip." "That's not true," Kimmel protested weakly, but his denial lacked any conviction, isn't it? Cher shot back. "How many other women have sat in this chair while you tried to tear them down? How many other female guests have left this studio feeling humiliated and violated by your questions? I may be the first one to call you out on it publicly, but I guarantee I'm not the first one you've done this to." The audience was completely transfixed now, witnessing not just an argument, but a complete exposure of what they were starting to realize might be a pattern of behavior from their beloved late-night host. "Jimmy, you made a critical error tonight," Cher said, now standing directly in front of his desk, towering over him despite her petite stature. "You thought you could bully me the way you've apparently bullied other women. You thought my age, my gender, my politeness would make me an easy target for your sick entertainment." Kimmel was now visibly sweating, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Cher, I think there's been a misunderstanding here." "The only misunderstanding, Jimmy, is yours," she replied coldly. "You misunderstood who you were dealing with. You see, I didn't survive 5 decades in this brutal industry by being a pushover. I didn't become a legend by letting small men try to tear me down for their own amusement." The show's producer was now frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but the camera operators seemed mesmerized by what they were witnessing, continuing to roll as television history was being made. "You want to talk about my relationships, Jimmy?" Cher continued, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Let's talk about your relationship with truth, with decency, with basic human respect. Let's talk about your relationship with the women you've ambushed on this show." "I've never ambushed anyone," Kimmel said desperately. But even he didn't seem to believe his own words anymore. "Jimmy, the entire world just watched you ambush me," Cher replied, with devastating calm. "They watched you invite me here under false pretenses, attack my personal relationships, question my parenting, and then tell me my character needs assassinating. If that's not an ambush, what would you call it?" Kimmel had no answer. He sat in his chair looking like a man who had just realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his career, possibly his life. "You know what the saddest part is, Jimmy?" Cher said, her voice now carrying a note of genuine pity. "You had the opportunity to have a real conversation with someone who's lived through 5 decades of entertainment history. You could have asked me about working with Sonny, about my acting career, about the challenges of reinventing myself multiple times. Instead, you chose to try to destroy me for your own sick gratification. The studio was so quiet you could hear, the cameras humming. Everyone present seemed to understand they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that would be talked about for years to come. "I'm done here, Jimmy," Cher announced, stepping back from his desk. "I'm done with your show, I'm done with your questions, and I'm done pretending that what just happened here was anything resembling professional journalism." As she turned to leave, Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Cher, wait, please. Can't we just finish the interview like professionals?" She turned back to him, and the look in her eyes was something that would haunt Jimmy Kimmel for the rest of his career. "Professionals, Jimmy," she said quietly. "There's nothing professional about what you just did. There's nothing professional about ambushing your guests. There's nothing professional about character assassination disguised as entertainment." She walked toward the exit, her head held high, her dignity intact despite everything Kimmel had tried to do to destroy it. As she reached the edge of the stage, she turned back one final time. "Jimmy, I hope you're proud of yourself tonight. I hope this was worth it for you, because you just showed the entire world exactly who you really are." With that, Cher walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned audience, a panicked production crew, and a host who had just committed career suicide on live television. The cameras kept rolling as Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the weight of what he'd done finally beginning to sink in. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before someone finally had the presence of mind to cut to commercial. But by then it was too late. The damage was done, the moment was captured, and Jimmy Kimmel had just learned the hard way that some legends fight back. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity stand up to a host like this before? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity stories that you won't see covered anywhere else.